Welcome to the Droidcon Italy webinar. My name is Francesco Brocera. I'm one of the Droidcon organizers. Today you'll be hearing One Man Army become full stack superhero with Flutter and Firebase from Bartosz Kraszewski. We will be using the YouTube comments for question and answer. Please post your question on YouTube. This webinar is brought to you by Synesthesia and powered by AWS Amplify. Thank you, Bartosz. Have a great webinar.
Thanks, Francesco, for introduction. My name is Bartosz Kraszewski, and today, in my session, I'd like to talk a little bit more about becoming the full stack superhero developer by just using the Flutter and Firebase. But let me just first introduce myself. So I'm a Bartosz Kraszewski, work in SoftwareHut, Poland, and I'm an experienced Android developer with a little crisis because at some point I got a little bit bored with Android development because of the quite some problems on this platform, but actually I really love mobile development. And when I first see the potential of using Firebase and Flutter, I really got in love into that. And actually, originally, I created this presentation more than almost a year ago when Flutter was really a niche. And at this time in our company, because we develop software for clients, I noticed that there is a big chance that we can make a production-ready project in Flutter. So after the presentation, right now we have all the lessons learned, so I can tell you a little bit more about how it went. Right. So what's the purpose of this presentation? So I was thinking about making it a technical talk. So you will see some Dart source code. You will also see some examples of integrations with services that I really like to talk about. But I'd like to extend it a bit more because I'm assuming you are developers, probably Android or Flutter mobile, and that means we usually work in companies developing software for clients or for other companies. But I was also wondering if you ever thought about creating your own application, push it into the Google Play, and try to live like an independent developer. So you can just, you are not related to any company, but you support your own product. And to do so, let's just think about what's the current state of app development. Because when the mobile phones were introduced, like there was first iPhone, it was, well, the unknown territory. Pretty much no one was working on mobile applications. And if you had a really good idea, I really like the idea of throw your iPhone into the air, where the sensors can read how high actually it went. And then you could create a leader score, and the app was super popular. At some point, it got even banned from stores because of the big chance of users destroying their own phones. So actually, right now, it looks like you may need an experienced, dedicated team that costs lots of money. And in my presentation, I'd like to show you alternative, how to do that. Because who's the part of this app development startup? Let's just assume that we are building a startup all together right now. The most important probably person, the CEO, the visionary, the bold person that go to the conferences. I'm not sure if you watched the Silicon Valley, the HBO show, which is super fun to watch. And Gavin Balson from this screenshot is actually this kind of person. And so since we are thinking about replacing all this huge team with one person, that means it have to be also you. So that means you will be not only coding, but you have to check the market, talk to your users, and read your app reviews to see whether users love it or there are some features that you can improve better. Obviously, we'll need Android developer. Because it's a Droidcon webinar, there's a huge chance you are already Android developer. We'll be working in Flutter, so does it mean your native Android knowledge is no longer valid? Actually, it is a lot, because even when working with a Flutter, you still need to understand how the Gradle file works, how the building application works, how to distribute application into the store. So this is all the really valuable information that even if you want to switch from Android development into Flutter, that's really helpful if you already know that basics. But if you are coming from maybe iOS or just starting working on this new technology, then no worries, you can quickly learn. There's a lot of materials and lots of good sources how to learn that. And normally, because usually it says that high quality mobile application are written natively. That means there's a iOS developer and Android developer, and they have to duplicate the business logic code, write it basically twice, and with every bug fixing and every change, they have to communicate and well, establish what's the shared version of an algorithm that then will be implemented both. When with using Flutter, that means you'll be the iOS developer as well. So unfortunately, that means you'll need to get Apple computer. Luckily, you can get a cheaper workstation. You don't need to buy the most recent MacBook Pro, or you even can buy used MacBook. It's still a really good investment. And besides, I noticed that even Android development on Mac works really nice out of a box. So I was originally saying that you don't need a huge budget to work on application, but investing in Apple computer here is the part that we can't really go through, but actually the results of these investments are really, really huge. Normally, obviously, when we have a mobile application, there is also some web app. Even if it's there are some products that are mobile only, but usually there should be an alternative to users that just want to use a computer. That means we'll need to hire a front-end developer. But luckily, with a Flutter, there is a solution to that problem, and I'll elaborate on that more in my next part of the presentation. And the backend, probably the toughest part. To me, it was always weird, right? Because I'm an Android developer on this project, and I always understood the fraction of the project, because I usually communicated with an API like a REST. I was making some calls. The backend guys returned me some data, but I never really know what's happening there. And in order to be the full stack, you'll need to understand both mobile and the backend part. So the options are, since we already know Java or Kotlin, we can try work on our own custom backend, or we can save some time and money by just using Firebase here. So that's a good alternative. The QA team, right? So because it's quite easy to develop application, but there are some guys that always work hard to break our work. So having the dedicated QA team is a super luxury. So if they check your application on a different mobile phones, different version, different manufacturers, Android versions, Unfortunately, in our limited set of assets, we should probably do that by ourselves. So that means we'll be using that. That means it's nice idea to work on application you can use on your daily base. So if it's solving your problem, that can also solve problem of many users that are willing to pay for your product. So if you try to design product for yourself first, that could help a lot. And besides, we have a friends, family. You can also think about building some kind of community around application. You can start with a beta version and build a WhatsApp group or Facebook group around your applications. So the first early adopters are the users who are willing to spend time to actually help you improve with your applications. So it's really important to start building such a community, because it will help you a lot. And UX designer. So it's really important for application to be beautiful and simple to use. In order to achieve that, you could hire someone who's really good at that part, or alternatively, you'll have to learn how to do that. I know that there are some examples of applications designed by developers which look, well, let's say terrible, right? Because sometimes we as a developer don't really think first about the UX part. But I think in order to be really good at mobile development and this to have this product-oriented vision, it's super important for us to know at least basics of the UX. That means we should probably read or watch presentations about material design, because Google made really good. They made really good service by just describing the whole process of designing applications, and then we can just use that knowledge already. So that means, in theory, we could replace this team with just one super dedicated, super ambitious developer who is you. And let's just focus on the tools we'll need to do that, right? So obviously the Flutter. I don't really want to introduce too much Flutter, because I think it's well known, but if there's a chance you never heard of Flutter, it's the new approach to cross-platform development by Google, where you write code in Dart that's then available on both Android, iOS, web, Mac applications, desktop applications. So it's a really cool UI framework that may actually work. And the Firebase. Firebase, which is marketed as I would call that, it started as a backend as a service, but the number of services they offer is really nice because there's much more. Let's take a look at these core features that are available for us. The part for building better applications. So we can get a free authentication system to use. We can get hosting, cloud functions, which can make our applications backend even better. The machine learning kit for introducing AI into our product, Cloud Firestore and real-time database as a alternative to REST API or using the WebSockets to store live data, cloud storage, which is really good for storing big files. And there's more. There's a Crashlytics service you may be familiar with to track bugs in your application and crashes, performance monitoring and test lab, and many of the marketing tools you can use, like analytics, tools for A/B testing. A/B testing is a case in your application if you want to choose which register page works better. You can create experiment and create first layout for the part of user, and then second UI slightly different for other bunch of user. And if you test it on a population that is big enough, you can see as a result that, well, looks like this screen works better. I can get better conversion, which means I get more user registering. And that's all part of the Firebase. All right, that sounds really good, but what's the price for such a solution? There's a Spark plan, quite limited, but really nice for application in this sandbox state or for first free users. And if you reach the point when you have more than just those basics, you can pay just $25 per month, which is a really good price. It's cheaper than hiring the backend developer, right? And if your application is getting more and more popular, you pay as you go, which means it's similar to other Google APIs when there's a price for like thousands of requests, but it's quite it's really important to think about scalability of your applications. So if you have million of users, you don't get $1 million per month bill from Google, but there are some basics. I can tell you how to do that. All right. So I was thinking about some application, like a real world applications we can develop together. So let's just, in Poland here, people love the real estates. So that means if you create a new applications for maybe people who want to rent up or just looking for a booking, there's a big chance of success. So there are just a couple of screens like authentications, and as a users, you want to browse the list of the apartments that are available, or maybe see that on the map. Let's just think about the basic requirements. The user can just sign up to applications, can browse listed apartments for rent, can filter properties by a few params, right? Because he might be interested in a different count of rooms or the area of a listed apartment, and can see the estates on a map, both list and map, especially on map because, well, location. That's the probably most important part of the real estate. We can think about the realtor user, that's the super user that can be like a moderator because he is able to change the properties of the real estates. So if notice that there's a bug in description, or maybe change the status that it's no longer available, that's the realtor role here. And there will be admin that manage pretty much everything. So every collection and every document we can have, we can do that. Also modify the users. There's a little star, but I'll explain that later because usually it's hard to manage the users from the mobile app, but we can have a small backend to help us with that. All right, so let's just now focus on choosing the right stack. So I was thinking about using the Flutter and Firebase, and for that, to build the Flutter app, I decided to use the block pattern, which is a really nice state management pattern when you can think about your application as a stream of state. Imagine state as a immutable class that describes everything what's happening on the screen. So there's like a title or URL to picture that's visible. So they are Boolean fields to say which part of app is editable, movable, slidable, clickable, right? And in order to change something onto screen, you send action to your block. The typical action is maybe like navigate to different screen, or let's say change filter. So the user typed some data into the filter, we want to refresh that, and as a result the stream of state will be updated. Obviously we'll need Firebase SDK as well, and the Google Maps to start working with app. All right, first, authentication system, because we want application to be authenticated. So nothing for user to see unless it's registered. And the old-fashioned way would be usually to create the REST API with such endpoints. So there should be a login, register, probably some remind password, and we'll need to securely store maybe the token or refresh token somewhere in our application and then refresh that. In Firebase, we get that out of the box. So it's an authentication system when we choose the method of login, because there could be a email password. We can enable our users to use Facebook or Google authentications. Then we can also set all the templates that we use when we want to send email to users. So everything is available to us through this console. And right now, let's just see how we can do that, because we'll just need to add new dependency, the Firebase out. Then, unfortunately, when we'll need to open the documentation and copy and paste some Android and iOS code from docs, especially the iOS part might be interested for us if we are Android developers. That's probably the first time we'll be using Xcode as well, and then we can understand why iOS people from our company usually blame or laugh from Xcode. And when we finish that copy and pasting, there's just a simple call, you see, because we have our authentication that's available, and there's a simple method, create user with email and password. And as a result, we receive our user. Obviously, the Firebase API is using futures. So if we are familiar with that technique in Dart, that means we immediately can start understand. Future is the async technique that's giving you, it really works similar to promise technique, because that means I'm not gonna give you this result immediately. This future is like a promise that it will be there. And by using await keyword, that means we are pausing the execution by not blocking the UI, but just pausing the execution in code, waiting for result. And if you want to see more examples, how to sign in into application, or how to maybe trigger the password reset, there's a really good example under this link, so we can follow. And actually, the Firebase API is quite well documented. There was, at this early stage, I noticed that the Flutter was kind of the second rank citizen, but it's changed a lot. It's now much better. And we can also extend the authentication system to support roles. We can use the built-in mechanism to store roles as a claims, but by describing it as an extension, we can go to the second part of the application, so how the Firebase can work for us as a backend, as a service here. So that's the example, because the left screenshot is the user that is an admin that can see users tab, and the second screen on the right is the realtor, because he can see both available and rented applications that are here, but can't manage the users. And right now, for that to create it as super simple technique, we can create for every user that have unique ID in our Firebase system, we can create additional collection to store just a couple of fields to see if that user is admin or realtor. And actually that part, so that's how we can use that, and I'll elaborate on that in more part the next part, which is called REST. So we are right now switching into the REST mode, but doesn't mean we'll be resting too much, because I'd like to explain the REST API quickly. It's like a facade for our applications that we can use to communicate different applications with a database. So instead of just querying the database directly, there's a fixed API all applications can use. And how can we do that in Flutter, in Firebase? Sorry. So you can think about this as, let's take a look at this path, right, called roles. That means under this collection, we have lots of documents. Each document can have its own ID, and the whole document is basically a bunch of different properties. There are different types of properties, and that's the part we can think about it as using the NoSQL database, because we can think about it as just a JSON of data. We can store here primitive types like a Boolean, string, number. We can keep arrays. I think the length is limited to like maybe 100 or thousands elements, but we can also store maps and nest objects. That means we can think pretty much, we can think about modeling our objects the way we want, but remember, it's a NoSQL database, so there are some rules of modeling NoSQL database. You need to remember that one document size is limited to 1 megabyte, and those documents should be designed to retrieve fast, because we don't want to store our application in one simple document that we fetch every time, because we transfer a lot of data. Instead, we need to structurize it so we download just the data that we need. Let's just I'll show that example on the actual data, but just we need to remember about one thing, that right now, technically that means instead of using API, we are pretty much working on the actual data here. And that's actually a fact, because in Firebase, even there is abstraction of this collection and document, we are quite touching the raw data immediately. That's why it's really important to abstract the whole, every call that we need when we want to, say, update user, change status of our property. We should abstract our whole collection in a repository object. That, and I can tell you why. Because first of all, we don't want to be 100% reliable on Firebase. At some point, we may change the Firebase into different implementations, but our abstraction here will stay the same. So we have our interface as a abstract class in a Dart, and all the defined methods will just need to switch implementation. Yeah, so let's take a look at the how the data is modeled for our application. So we have our collection called apartments, and here in my collections I have a couple of documents. Each document have unique ID, and then I have just a flat structure of properties. So there are just added timestamp, apartment state, which is an enum that's serialized into the string, some simple description. We can see also the floats. Actually, those are double precision numbers for location, and some realtor ID. Note that I'm not nesting too much data, because nesting too much data is usually a bad idea. In NoSQL database, we think about our data as it's super cheap to write data, but we need to fetch data fast. So sometimes it's even a good idea that we duplicate data. That means we can store same data under a number of different collections or paths, so it's quite easy to fetch later. All right, and inside our repository, let's just take a look at the code needed to create our document. So we'll need to just get our Firestore instance and get the collection named apartments. Then we can just call .document, and we can start our call by using the set data when we need to pass map of data. That means using this map means every model that we create will need to have from JSON and to JSON methods, because that's how the Firebase serialization actually works. To Firebase, your data is just basically a JSON. And when we want to read data, it's remember to know difference between reading the single snapshot and observing document, because Firebase is a real-time database, which means it's a really good for chat or really dynamic applications. That means we can either remember we can have our REST API call get apartments with some parameters that will return us some data. But this API call will return data once. And in Firebase, we can either ask for system to get our data once by using the documents get or collection get, or we can specify our collection in where some parameters that we want, like we just want our apartments to be available. And by using snapshots.listen, we are basically subscribing for this collection. That means we can get our first information about the available apartments, and every time something change, this collection will be triggered again. That means for chat application, it's a super cool feature, because we can just listen for messages in conversation and update our UI. But for the real estate, which are not so dynamic, we may just need to use, instead of using snapshots listen, we can just get our documents as a feature and then keep working on them later. And there's one bonus, because there's offline support. When working on mobile application, offline support is really important, but it's kind of hard to work to develop it well. Normally, we'll need to create SQLite database, store the data then, and create our sync mechanism. But in Firebase, you get that for free. That means every time you use such a create document code, even if you are offline, that means the local data will be stored, and whenever there's a chance, you can get your connection back. Data will be synced, so it's a really nice feature. Right, but when storing, when knowing information about the properties, it's really important to show beautiful photos. And how can we store informations about photos in Firebase? As I mentioned, the document size is limited to 1 megabyte. No problem, because there's a Firebase storage. And normally, if we'll need to upload photos using the REST API, we'll need to think about the post call, and we can store the attachment as a multi-part. Remember about those correct MIME types, which is not quite easy, but let me show you an example how we can do that in Firebase using the storage. Storage panel is available in your Firebase here under the database tab, and that's basically a wrapper for Google storage. Because Google owns Firebase, so they share some technology there. So we can see we have our folder called thumbnails, and we can send our file. We can preview the files, delete it from this browser. So it's like a admin panel that we get for free when we just create our application. And now from the code part, we'll be working with this storage reference object that's getting reference to our thumbnails collection. Yeah, those are the same thumbnails. And we'll create the new child with our file name that because we just took a picture and we see that. Okay, so when we have our reference, we can start the uploading task. So there's a method put file that takes a file, and we can specify some storage metadata that we want, some like a content type, whatever we want. And after that, we'll be uploading a task. But when we finished our uploading, it's really good idea to have the download URL. So after we completed our upload task, we are doing some await operation here. As a result, we'll get the snapshot of a download URL. Unfortunately, we'll have to await again to get the actual string URL. So the uploading file, it's a multi-step operation, but you can see those command just fits the screen, so it's not that complicated. When we have our download URL, we can store that in Firebase in our collection. So then inside application, when we receive collection of our real estates, by using this URL, we'll just need to use a network image widget to then display this graphic, right? But what about some AI? Because in today, you can just create application that don't have any AI on board, right? What kind of investor is going to spend some money on your application, and how can you market that? You obviously need some AI. In Firebase, you can get a number of cool AI features. So there's a text recognition. So you take a picture of maybe some sign, and the ML API will tell you what's the text on this picture. There's also face recognition, barcode scanning, and others. And note that pretty much every of these feature is available on device and partially in cloud. The difference is that text recognition on device works really good, but on cloud it's even better. But for most use cases, it's actually just faster to get that on device with a pre-trained model, so you don't have to make additional API calls. So here we'll be pushing AI into a totally non-AI project, because I was thinking really hard how we can use some AI in our application, and I think I found one use case. So let's just imagine that we take picture of inside of apartment we want to rent to someone, and we can use Firebase Vision to label images, to label content of an image. So I'm taking picture of my living room and receive a number of object detected, like maybe there's a piano, there's a big window, and we can use that as labels to allow user quick search for that. If someone is looking for apartment with a piano, he'll be interested in the apartment that contains one. And how we can do that? Let's go through the simple code. So we'll need to file for our picture that we just created, and we'll convert that into the Firebase Vision image by just calling the from file here. And there's a cloud labeler that's part of the Firebase API that's taking the process image first. So that's like a local call. So it's taking the vision image as a parameter, and then we can just start processing it. And as a result, in await, because it's an async call here, we can get our list of image labels that inside contain just a text. So after every picture that it's created, we can store it in a cloud, the picture, but we can also store the labels that we already have, and allowing users to query properties better. And then that's the information how we can browse the result. So basically that text is most important part, but we can also think about the confidence parameter that says how Google API is confident that our text is real. We can set some threshold, maybe because it's a double, that means 0.8 is a confidence that we use. Otherwise, we'll be discarding the results we got. Is it overkill? A little bit, yes, but it was so much fun to work with, and actually by overusing the AI in application, looks like in those digital age is a really nice idea, and companies do that a lot. There's one bonus, Flutter Web. As I mentioned earlier, that you may need a front-end developer. The Flutter Web is still quite not finished, but the idea is that when you create your code in Dart, you can then call it like a Flutter Web export, and this will compile the application into the web portal. For instance, this website, more like corporate application, was written in Dart and in Flutter. You can mostly say that by implementing the material design. So that's a nice promise. Right now, it's still not ready for production, I believe, but at some point, it's a note how cool would it be to just create one application that's then we can use on both mobile and web. Because obviously Firebase is also giving us a hosting service that we can use. We can just choose the area when we want to store our application, if we want to store it in European or American part of the world, and it's available for users. All right, so those are the features I mentioned. So it looks like the Flutter and Firebase sounds quite too good to be true, right? So if it's so easy, why don't everyone use this? And why don't we see tons of Flutter Firebase applications? There are some reasons. Obviously, there are still some Flutter issues. Flutter is super popular, and the number of issues is decreasing, but there is still something that may be protecting user from going full Flutter. If you go to Flutter GitHub and see number of issues opened, you might be surprised why there is so many of open issues. Unfortunately, a lot is because of users, instead of ask question on Stack Overflow, they just open new issue, how to do something with a button. And the Flutter team can't close all those tickets fast enough. Then there's one more risk, because note that Flutter is a Google technology and Firebase is a Google technology. Most of us are Android developers, so we may have some relationship with Google, but at this point, remember that starting a project with a Flutter and Firebase, we are putting all our eggs into just one basket. And Google actually have a history of stopping products or killing the technology. That means we'll have to be conscious and remember that there's a price for everything. All right, so in my quick summary, I'd like to point that Flutter is definitely worth trying. So right now it's quite stable. A lot of companies use that. There's tons of materials online, and first of all, it's fun to use. to me, Android developers, after a couple of years of Android development, it was really fun to start working with those streams and blogs. Then, when mixing with Firebase, it's a 100% viable option to test your idea, because sometimes you don't need to create super complicated application, develop it for years, just to test your idea. Maybe you have some idea of application that's not present on the market, and you may consider making a quick proof of concept using Flutter and Firebase just to test how it works. But remember, that means you are relying 100% on just one company that have history of killing products. And starting startup alone sounds like a doable option, although in a long term, it's really nice idea to get some partner to keep each other motivated and help with those downfalls, because you can be motivated to do a lot of stuff, but maybe after some failure, your motivation go to zero, and having a partner will definitely help you getting that better. And I'd like to talk about the risky project that I suggested, because one of our clients was a bookmaker, but not the bloody one like Tom Shelby, more like well-established Polish company. They asked us to deliver a betting app for them, mostly live betting, also betting. But we noticed at this time that, well, it's a really serious business, because there's in sport and in gambling there's a lot of money, and their users are extremely impatient, so they need high quality applications. And I suggested using Flutter for that, and at this point it was quite risky, because Flutter was much earlier then, but luckily we finished this product. It's already on market, and it's ranked as one of the best Polish betting applications. So our team did a really great job. And what I remember, the most problematic component for us was web view, because we have to display a lot of web content, and the differences between Android and iOS was really biggest on this web view component. And because we started this project as a just team of Android developers with not many iOS development, the iOS ground was not really hospitable for us. That means we have some problems with Xcode, with building application, with handling the app certificates, which is a really hell. But luckily, we have a iOS team that was focused on just the native applications, and they helped us a lot. They were looking at this Flutter thing, pretty much saying that, well, looks promising, but we really like our native world. But so they are not really happy with Flutter, but help us a lot with the workflow and adding more team to handle the certificates. But what we noticed, that application was nearly 100% crash-free, which was actually surprising. And we initially thought maybe there's a bug or something, maybe the crash reporting service is not working. That's mostly because the block pattern, if you use it from the most popular GitHub project, is quite safe to use, because instead of crashing application, it will call the on error. So then we find some the uncaught exceptions that were not crashing applications, but maybe blocking state for a while. But that's actually something good, that we're working with this pattern will give you application that's pretty much crash-free. I also created a blog post about this Flutter success story. So if you are interested in that, you can also take a read. A couple of materials. So if you are interested, you may also take a screenshot here, or I can share my presentation later, so you can just directly click on slides. Those are materials we were using to learn both Firebase and Flutter. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Bartosz. So Bartosz will be taking questions shortly. I'd like to once again thank our sponsor, Amazon Amplify, and let you know that our next webinar will be the 29th of September. Hope you see you there. And Bartosz, thank you again, and I'm back to you for the question. So,
okay. I can see the question, the best way how to learn REST API. And to do that, I would say, first, when learning something, it's really important to know the basic concepts. So it's like reading what is REST, what are types of the endpoints, what's the difference between GET and POST. That's the important part. That part you'll just need to learn and understand. So either read some article about it, or maybe watch video, because there's a lot of knowledge on YouTube, so we don't have to buy expensive courses. And the next part is just learn by doing. You can find a lot of free APIs. They are mostly read-only, like a questions, like a weather API. So in order to learn how to consume the weather API, you can create a simple application that then uses this API. You will be making actual calls and see the results. So in usual, that's the best pattern of learning. So there are two key concepts. So first is to learn the basic concepts, to get familiar with that, and then try by doing.
Okay, Bartosz, I think that there is no other question, so we can stop here. Thank you again for this wonderful webinar, and hope to see you again in one of these webinars or in Droidcon Italy. Thank you again, Bartosz.
Thanks. That was a pleasure to deliver webinar for such a nice society, right? So see you later next time.
Thank you, Bartosz.